Horizontal Clitoral Hood piercings. Going to pros and cons. Going to give you 5 of each. Also, what you should consider beforehand, what the piercing experience is going to be like, healing it, jewelry choices, living with the piercing, and what happens if you decide you don't want it anymore. Coming up next on Pros and Cons by Piercer, Season 2, Episode number 29. So you might want to stick around. For those that are new to the channel, first off, welcome to the channel. Hope you're enjoying the videos, hoping you're finding them educational and informative and a little bit entertaining, if not a lot entertaining. But you may not know who I am. My name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio located right here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. So, when I talk to you about these things, I'm talking to a level of expertise that comes from being in the body piercing industry for well over 27 years. Okay, so the piercing we're talking about today is a female genital piercing. Just as a disclaimer, if you are easily offended or don't want to hear me talk about female genitalia or piercings of female genitalia or anything to do with it, or maybe you're not of an appropriate age to really know about this stuff, find something else, please. We have plenty of videos on the channel that have absolutely nothing to do with sexuality or genital piercings. Also, if you are looking for any type of sexual gratification, anything to make you tingle and so forth, you're going to be sadly disappointed. The whole point of this video is to educate those that may be considering the piercing. Maybe their partner's thinking about getting it done, or they're just plain curious. There's nothing that's going to be exciting except the sound of my voice and my beautiful image. Now, let's talk about exactly what this piercing is. It's kind of the cousin or sister to the vertical clitoral hood piercing. Done through the hood, which is where those the labia minoras meet at the top. Unlike going through straight through it, this goes through kind of the top tissue at the very top, and then has the ring or circular jewelry where the ball rests against, where that clitoris generally kind of peeks out a little bit. This is often called a clitoris piercing or a clit piercing. We actually do not pierce the clitoris at all. We do not go through the glands in any way, shape, or form. The jewelry has contact with the glands, and with this one, a little bit less than you would have with the vertical. However, it never actually passes through it. That is a dangerous piercing to have done. You really have to have a very definite anatomy for it, and there are very few people on this planet that I would trust to even consider having them pierce that. This is a lot safer, and is going to cause less possibility for nerve damage and etc. Now, anatomy, very important with this particular piercing, and I'll probably talk a little bit more about this later on. But there is kind of two types of, two levels, I guess, extremes of female genitalia. Female genitalia tends to be a lot more variety driven than, say, male genitalia. Males is kind of bigger, it's kind of smaller, but everything's kind of shaped the same. You're either cut or you're uncut, and that's about it. With females, it can be vastly different from woman or female to female. With this particular piercing, it's kind of broken down into two different types. There's heels, where the genitals kind of sit outside the body, and then there's valleys where the genitals are more sunken into the body. With this particular piercing, it's going to work best with those that are more on the heel side, where that area is kind of free of the outer labias or labia majoras. Now, history on these, there's a lot of history, as I mentioned, in the vertical clitoral hood piercing, pros and cons, if you watch that. There's a lot of information out there about the history of male genitalia being in a lot of different tribal cultures, especially in Asia, but there's very little mention of female genitalia. Now, whether or not that was just an omission because people just didn't talk about it, or if it was something that wasn't done, it's hard to know. I think it's safe to say that if one was pierced, the other one was probably pierced too. Just me. Anyway. But that makes this piercing mostly a modern invention. Gained popularity in the punk and BDSM subculture in the late 70s. It was developed at Gauntlet by Jim Ward and etc. Was probably the first time it really kind of went into the mainstream was in 1994's Pulp Fiction, where it's mentioned she talks about all the piercings she has. I think a lot of people didn't have a clue. Now, this kind of gained a lot of momentum in the early 21st century because a lot of celebrities talked about getting this piercing done. More so, I would say the vertical than the horizontal. And the main difference is the sensation that the vertical tends to cause more because there's more contact opposed to the horizontal. Also, where the vertical comes in contact is usually an area that's covered by that clitoral hood. So it tends to be more sensitive. Now, I've had clients that have had both, and they really said that they kind of preferred one over the other, and it has varied greatly from person to person. And we'll get into some of that a little bit later, too. So with that all out of the way, let's move on to why you came here. Pros, the advantages, the things that make you say, hey, this is the piercing for me. And I'm actually going to give you 6 of each of the pros and 6 of the cons. First one is, and I just kind of touched on that just now, is it enhances sexual pleasure. You have a piece of hard jewelry in contact with a very sensitive part of the body, so it probably will make it feel better. Now, you generally, and I'll get into this a little bit more when we talk about jewelry, you generally need to experiment with different shapes, sizes, and etc. and types to find out what works best for you. But it generally kind of helps a little bit. Now, how much does it help? That varies greatly from person to person. And the bottom line is that your biggest sexual muscle is your mind. The newness of that sensation, just the idea of having it pierced, can kind of raise one's libido and thus make their sexual experiences a little bit better. Over time, that may fade a little bit, and I will get into that too a little bit later. Now, number 2, long history of healing. This piercing is a very quick heal, usually fairly easy. Of course, you do have to do various things to make sure that happens, and I'll get into that too when we get into healing. But for the most part, this piercing is probably going to heal for you, and it's not going to give you a lot of issues or problems. 3, it's an easy heal. I guess I kind of already said that. But there is a large blood supply in that part of your anatomy. Usually things in your genitals will heal out in about anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. To be on the safe side, I usually suggest treating like a healing piercing for 3 months, but it is one of the quickest healing parts of the body. It's not really prone to infection or other problems like bumps and etc. It usually heals fairly easy, little effort, and successfully. Number 4, doesn't affect lifestyle as much as other piercings. Unlike piercings that are going to be on your head or your torso or etc., it's kind of in a shielded area that doesn't come in contact with things like bedding, clothing, etc. Common question I get is exercise. Like, am I going to be able to ride the bike, the exercise bike, and all this other stuff? If you look at your anatomy and realize exactly where this is going to be pierced, it's generally very far away from where your thighs actually come in contact with the area or meet. It's also way higher than any type of saddle that you may encounter on a bicycle. However, if you're horseback riding, especially Western style, with the horn, it probably wouldn't feel great. But other than that, it really doesn't affect things as much as you think it would. Of course, I wouldn't suggest sleeping on your stomach, but other than that, usually doesn't affect much of anything, clothing, etc. Number 5, easy to conceal. The nice thing about genital piercings is if you don't want people to know you have them, they don't need to know you have them. The only people that are going to probably know that you have this are people you're intimate with and people that you tell. So if you live in an area of the world or work in a profession where piercings are kind of frowned upon, it's an easy piercing to get done and have. The last one, number 6, kind of the bonus one, no throbbing and aching. With piercings, especially piercings that are done in the ear and the face and nipple piercings that are generally prone to this, you'll have an aching and throbbing immediately after the piercing is done. This can last, in some cases, a couple of minutes. Some cases, I've had some people that have had it, they said that it lasted over an hour. Now, with genital piercings, it's usually, oh my God, that hurts, and then it's over almost immediately. You don't feel anything except that initial pain when the piercing's done. So you're not going to have the throbbing, you're not going to have the aching like you would with other piercings. Now, before we move on to the cons, if you like the video, find it informative, find it useful, give me a thumbs up. Let me know that you liked it, because I like it when you like it. If you haven't subscribed, well, why the hell not? Go ahead and subscribe, hit that notification bell so that you know every single time we post something. Now let's move on to the cons and disadvantages, things that make you go, I don't know about this. This may not be the place I want to be and the thing I want to have. Yeah. Starting with number 1, anatomy. Now, this is kind of a disadvantage. It's kind of a con in a way, but pretty much if you don't have the correct anatomy for this piercing, it is not going to heal easily, and it's going to be uncomfortable. If your labia majoras are heavily pronounced and it's very close and tight, and you're more of that valley, like I talked about earlier, the constant twisting back and forth of the ring and not allowing it to sit kind of just naturally without pressure is going to cause discomfort. You really have to have the correct anatomy for this piercing. The hood itself needs to be somewhat pronounced and the tissue needs to be loose, but beyond that, it's more the outer structure than the actual area that we pierce. Number 2, more prone to STDs. Basically, what that means is you are more prone to STDs even after the piercing is healed. You have hard metal through soft tissue. Because sexual activity can be a little strenuous, it can damage the piercing, and you get a possible exchange of microorganisms, and then suddenly you have an STD. So you pretty much have to practice safe sex every time you switch partners, which means latex barrier, minimum 6 months, tested, then 6 months. And then if you're both clear, then no more latex barrier. If, depending on there's other situations you'd use that. But that's just the basics. Now, number 3, for the first 6 months, regardless if you've been with that partner for 80 years or what have you, everybody's clean, you still need to practice safe sex. The reason is the piercing is in a fragile state, not only during the healing process where it's an open wound, but even immediately after that until it strengthens up and the piercing has time to thicken. It's very fragile, so you have an increased likelihood of causing an infection. So for that first 6 months, I would suggest using a latex barrier. Number 4, alluded to this a little bit earlier, may lose sensitivity. Now, the newness situation. A lot of people, I've kind of had this ongoing debate between clients and piercing enthusiasts in general and those that pierce. Yes, it does seem to be less exciting the longer you have it. And part of the reason I think that is the case is the newness of the sensation wears off, and the newness and excitement of a new experience goes away. With genital piercings, it may make it better. It may make it worse. It probably won't make it worse, but it'll definitely make it different. That difference can kind of subside the longer you have it. Now, whether or not this is contact that's actually causing this and the clitoris actually becomes less sensitive, don't know. Number 5, kind of the exact opposite. You may find it too much stimulation or the area is too sensitive. I know that I've encountered it in the past with partners who just do not like to have that area of their body touched or stimulated by other people. They may have the same problem with this piece of jewelry. There might be a little too much movement, a little bit discomfort for that standpoint. I have had a handful of clients over the years that have came back and said, yeah, I've had this in for 3 days and it's driving me nuts and I need you to take it out for me. So that's always a possibility. And the last one, number 6, bleeding. This piercing will bleed in some cases up to 5 to 6 days, so it requires you to wear a pad. You should prepare for that in advance. Most people, I'd say, you see some bleeding the first day, maybe night, and then the next day you don't see anything after that. But it's something you do need to consider. Now, with the cons all out of the way, before we move on to things you should look for or things you should consider before getting it done, I want to talk a little bit about our merch store. We have various different t-shirts, various different products, from fanny packs, leggings, beach towels, throw pillows, etc. A lot of different designs and colors. Link is in the description. There's also one of those merch bars down below. Now let's move on to what you should know, or things you should look for. The first one being is that your piercer is experienced, professional, makes you feel at ease. Keep in mind that you're probably going to have to be a little bit naked in front of this person. They should make you feel comfortable. They should know how to do that. They should also be informative and teach you things about the piercing. Open to answer any questions you may have about it. And they should voluntarily give you a consultation that talks about things like what it's going to take to heal it, what they suggest as far as aftercare, any risks that are involved, or any additional things that are going to help you make an educated decision on whether or not this piercing is right for you. Next thing is during a consultation, it's probably a good idea to have your piercer evaluate the area, take a look at it, make sure that it's something that is going to work with your anatomy. With genital piercings, especially clitoral hoods and triangles, where your anatomy really dictates whether or not that piercing can be done, I highly suggest that you do a little bit of research of other female genital piercings before you go in, just in case you got there, you're all excited to get a piercing, and then you find out you can't get that piercing. Having some alternatives, maybe outer labias, maybe inner labias, maybe a triangle because you can't get a vertical or horizontal clitoral hood. Do your research, see what appeals to you, and then talk to them about it if you don't have the correct anatomy for it. They should have the correct jewelry, made of a material that you don't have an allergic reaction to or aren't sensitive to. Titanium's always probably your best option. It should be no thinner than 14 gauge. It should be circular, meaning a ring of some style, or a circular barbell. These can bleed, as I mentioned before, for up to 5 days, sometimes 6. It's a good idea to have those pads, or sanitary napkins. Buy those in advance. Take them to the piercing when you go in to get the piercing done, so then you have something to avoid bleeding on things. It's just a nice thing to have done in advance. I always suggest that in this next part. If you find out if your piercer supplies aftercare product or sells it, or if it's something you need to purchase elsewhere. Usually this is going to be sterile saline, thinking like Neomed or Nelmed, piercing aftercare. It's good to have all those things beforehand so you don't really have to deal with it the day of the piercing. Okay, let's move on to the piercing itself. The first thing that's going to happen, of course, the consultation, jewelry selection. They're going to evaluate your anatomy. They're probably going to give you a waiver to fill out, or you filled it out in advance. Usually these waivers are full of a bunch of different questions that we need to know. We need to know that you're healthy. We need to know that you don't have any allergic reactions to anything that we're going to be using. And you're submitting to it or consenting to get the piercing done. Now, a lot of things are going to be covered in this is like health problems like hemophilia, blood clotting problems, anemic, diabetes. If you have any of these conditions, you really need to speak to your physician. We don't know for sure whether or not the piercing is going to be an issue. Diabetes, usually if it's treated and it's type 2, you're probably not going to have many problems. But if you've had issues healing wounds, scratches, cuts, etc., you probably are going to have issues healing a piercing. So when in doubt, talk to your doctor. Same thing goes for medication, especially blood thinners. We don't know your history. We do not know how that medication affects you and how it's going to affect whether or not you bleed too much. So always check about those things in advance. Now, when we're talking about allergic reactions to products, the waiver should list every product that the piercer may be using. If you've had issues with any of it before, let them know. Because they're probably going to have an alternative product that they can use so you can safely get the piercing done and you don't have to worry about a massive allergic reaction. Once you've completed the waiver, generally we will clean up, wash your hands, scrub up, set up the equipment, and etc. That's done. We will disinfect the area using a surgical scrub of some type. Then we will mark the area. Now, the marking should be at the top of the hood. The hood's kind of a triangular shaped area. It's usually right there at the peak. It's straight across horizontally. And generally what I suggest doing and what I do is I'll take the ring and set it or hold it up next to the piercing area to kind of give an idea or gauge where that ball or the end of the jewelry is going to hit. We want it to kind of come in contact with that area right there where the clitoris kind of peeks out from underneath the hood. Now, we don't know you in an intimate way, so we're kind of guessing at what's going to work best for you, but generally that's what most people want when they want this piercing. Piercing should be done with forceps. The area is clamped lightly. Usually a breathing exercise is involved with deep breaths, and the piercing needle goes through and out. The forceps are removed. The jewelry follows the needle straight through, and then the ball or closure is put on the ring. There might be a little bit of slight bleeding, to moderate to slight or slight to moderate. Basically, usually these, like I said, you feel a sharp pain, a sharp pinch. Once those clamps can be kind of uncomfortable with some people. Once the clamps are removed, you're probably not going to feel anything, maybe a little tug and a little bit of pressure, but it's usually you're not going to have that throbbing and aching like you do with other piercings. Of course, it's going to be sensitive to touch. If you bang it, smack it, hit it, it's going to hurt. So kind of keep that in mind. Clothing-wise, I generally suggest avoiding things that have tight seams or super tight there, especially jeans or rougher denim materials. Usually loose fitting's your best option for that first week or so. Now let's talk about healing. Average healing time on this, like I said, is 8 to 12 weeks. I generally suggest treating it like a healing piercing for 3 months. That will involve cleaning with sterile saline twice daily. Usually, basically, you just mist the area if it's the mist type. Let it stay in contact for about 5 minutes, and then just kind of pat off any excess or dab off any excess. Leave it be. Do that twice a day for at least the healing period or until it stops producing discharge, and it'll start to grow inward. Those holes get kind of grow inward as that tissue connects, and then the jewelry will move very freely. Whenever in doubt of whether or not a piercing is healed or not, or if there seems to be something wrong, always go see your piercer. We generally, if they're an ethical, excited, passionate piercer, they like to see their work and see how it's progressing in the healing stages. And we're happy to go, yeah, that doesn't look quite healed. You need a couple more weeks. Or go, man, you did a fantastic job. Thank you for contributing to the whole thing, and it looks really great. So when in doubt, ask your piercer. Also, during this period of time, you want to practice cross-contamination prevention. The primary things that's going to involve is washing your hands before you handle it, no oral contact or exchanging bodily fluids on you around the piercing for a minimum of 6 months. That doesn't mean you can't have sex for 6 months. It just means you need to use some type of latex barrier. No swimming. Do not submerge piercing in bodies of water you cannot control the quality of. Keep pets away from it. Do not let them sleep in the bed with you. They're going to probably contaminate everything they come in contact with. Keep bedding, clothing, towels, etc. cleaned on a regular basis until the piercing is completely healed. Now, sex whenever you're comfortable. Now, this next part kind of goes against that, but avoid playing with the piercing. Avoid obsessive movements or excessive movements. Sex gentle at first. If it hurts to do something, try changing positions or resting for a little while and trying again, or just plain try something else. If you use any type of lubricant, make sure that it is water-based. Also, make sure there's no warming gels, etc. The same thing if your partner is using a condom. Make sure that it doesn't have spermicide on it, because that does not feel good on fresh piercing. Do not sleep directly on the piercing. If you are sleeping and you can feel pressure against it, don't sleep that way. It's going to cause problems. First 3 to 5 days, you're going to experience redness, discolorization, heat, tenderness to touch, and inflammation. Also, as I mentioned earlier, it's a good idea to wear a pad, not only to cut down the bleeding, but also, because it can bleed up to 5 to 6 days, also cuts down the amount of moisture in the area, which cuts down the amount of bacteria, and, dun, 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 It also kind of cushions the area, so it makes it a little bit more comfortable when it's going to be most tender. Now let's move on to jewelry. Jewelry should stay in at all times, only removing it to replace it. This piercing, clitoral hoods sometimes stay open indefinitely. However, if you want to keep the piercing, it's always a good idea to leave something in it. You may want to try different shapes, sizes, etc., or styles to see what works best for you. Like I mentioned earlier, we generally try to pierce where we think it's going to do you the most contact or make it as most enjoyable point. However, we don't know you in an intimate way. So playing and trying different types of jewelry can kind of improve it. Also, if that newness wears off, sometimes switching to a different style jewelry can make it just like you just got a new one. Just got it. Anyway, best jewelry for this is cat bead rings, circular barbells, fixed bead rings. Anything that's circular. The only disadvantage of the circular barbells is you do have to check the tightness of the balls on a regular basis, and they have kind of a weird, they feel different. That's what I've been told. The piercing is through a mucous membrane, so avoid anything that is marked silver or sterling. Both of those things can cause silver poisoning, which is a permanent darkening of the area, kind of a bluish black-green. Looks like a terrible dot from a tattoo. It's from silver salts leaking out of the silver. Body absorbs it because it's a mucous membrane, and then you have silver poisoning. Not life-threatening, just doesn't look good. Okay, let's move on to living with the piercing. Jewelry, once again, should stay in at all times, only taking out to replace. Always practice safe sex when you switch partners, as we've talked about earlier. One final thing, usually with this piercing, there's not really a lot of maintenance that needs to be done. You probably just want to clean it with your warm water and soap, just like you do every other part of your body in the shower. Beyond that, there's really not a lot to deal with. Piercings, once they've been in for a while, they go through the healing process, kind of become a part of you. It's more strange to have it out than to have it in. You rarely notice it. This piercing's in the same realm, just like any other one. Now, I only bring this up because I get asked about it occasionally. Chastity. There is, and I mentioned this in the vertical one, there is these products out there. They're called clit shields or clitoral hood shields. They usually use a combination of a couple of different piercings, either Christina or a vertical hood and one or two clitoral hoods, or maybe even some Labia Minoras. How effective these are is really up for debate, and the problem with this type of stuff is, we never know exactly what material those are made out of. There's no third-party certification that it's this material or that material. We don't know if it's implant grade. We don't know if there's things in there that could be possibly harmful. The other thing is they tend to be not very effective. And lastly, they're going to put pressure on that piercing. And there's always a possibility of causing issues with a healed piercing by putting extra weight on it or pressure on it. And these things can do that. It's just, I don't know. Do your research. And if you do decide to do it, you should treat it like a novelty. It's kind of something you do for a short period of time, figure out if it works or not, and then take it from there. Now, lastly, let's talk about abandoning the piercing. For one reason or another, you've decided you don't like it, you want to get rid of it, and you don't want it anymore. So what do? If the piercing is still healing, removal of the jewelry will probably just cause it to close fairly rapidly. You do want to keep an eye on it and monitor it just like you would any other wound on your body. Also take care of it just like you would a cut or scrape or puncture anywhere else. Now, if it is healing and there are any signs, and I repeat, any signs of infection or other issue, see your piercer or your doctor before removing the jewelry. There is a distinct possibility that by removing the jewelry, if it is in fact infected, that the two-hole seal, trapping the infected tissue and fluids inside, leading to the creation of an abscess or a cyst, which means you're definitely off to your doctor to have it lanced and drained. If you leave the jewelry in, it allows a way for your body to expel that infection like it wants to. If you don't know, one of the ways your body deals with infection is it kind of groups it together and then slowly pushes it to the surface. If you block off that path, it's just going to kind of sit there, and your body's going to continue to try to isolate it and continue to try to push it up. If there's too much resistance, then it's going to need to be lanced and drained, and that is not something you should go to your piercer and have done. It needs to be done by a medical professional. Also, don't try doing it at home, kids. No. Now, if you've had the piercing, it's healed. If you remove it, it will slowly begin to close. Sometimes with these, they don't close. Just like vertical clitoral hoods, for one reason or another, they don't close. So I've had clients that, have had it out for a couple of years, came in to get it re-pierced, and they're like, and I'm like, let's just run a taper pin and see if it's still open. And lo and behold, it was still open. So it may never close, but if it does, it'll seal up in the center and then fill in outward. This will make it appear to be open for much longer than it actually is. You'll see those 2 indentation scars on both sides, and it'll look like it did, when the jewelry was in, except there's not jewelry in it anymore. Only other thing that could happen is sebum collecting in the actual piercing. It is like a waxy, oily, or it's a waxy oil. Kind of has the consistency of cream cheese, has a very distinct odor to it. Sometimes when you squeeze empty piercings, you'll see that stuff come out in kind of stringy kind of things. It's perfectly fine. It's a natural part of your body. It's how your body stays watertight, and also how you keep skin moisturized and keeps it and lubricates hair follicles. For some reason or another, it tends to collect a lot in piercings. I don't know if there's just more ducts there because of scar tissue or what's going on. However, people freak out about it. It doesn't mean it's infected. Don't worry about it. Just clean it off. Soap, water, you'll be fine. Well, that's everything I think I have to say about this. If you have any questions, comments you'd like to add to the discussion, please leave a comment. I usually answer them when I have time. Till next time, here's hoping all your piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see your body piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Take care. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Maybe that one.